A religious narcissist appears to be up close and personal with God. They may show up at prayer meetings and have an incredible understanding of the Bible. They may even teach the Bible. They may speak in tongues and prophesy. But the truth of the matter is, they are at war with God, despite all the pious things they may say or do. They may not even realize it. In this video, I'm going to look at a colorful passage in the Bible where Jesus actually talks about the hypocrisy of the religious narcissists of his day and 3 things he says we should do when we find ourselves encountering similar people in our lives. Now first, before we get into it, for those of you who are new to my channel, welcome. I'm Shaneen Megji. Welcome to my channel on Toxicity is Not Your Destiny. My mission is to help people navigate toxic relationships in their lives from a biblical, practical, and spiritual perspective. So if you'd like to receive regular content from me on this subject, take a moment, click that subscribe button, and click that bell, because I'm going to be bringing you videos on a regular basis to empower you in navigating toxic relationships. I do aim to get a video out every week or so. So without further ado, let's dive into the subject. What is a religious narcissist? A religious narcissist is someone who professes to love God and behaves piously, doing all the religious things and saying all the right things. They may have a big laundry list of religious requirements for everyone around them, but when you look up close and personal at their lives, they are chronically arrogant, entitled, lacking in heartfelt empathy, exploitative, grandiose, and seeing themselves as superior. Narcissists are unable to regulate their negative emotions, and they need constant validation, constant affirmation, and admiration from others. They lack self-awareness, and they tend to manipulate and deceive to get what they want. Do you know anyone like that? Well, the religious leaders of Jesus' day in the Bible had many of the traits I just mentioned. And how do we know they were narcissists? Well, narcissists have these baseline emotions, primarily anger, hatred, and envy. Those are the 3 dark triad emotions of a narcissist that are always simmering just beneath the surface. And if you look at the religious leaders, they were full of contempt, hatred. They did not empathize with the suffering of people. When Jesus would heal people, instead of the religious leaders rejoicing that those people were freed from years of suffering and torment, they were enraged that Jesus healed on the Sabbath. The religious leaders wanted people's honor and admiration, which was actually their drug of narcissistic supply. And because Jesus was getting more admiration and more honor than them, it fueled their hatred of him to the point that they wanted to annihilate him. Also, whenever Jesus would confront the Pharisees or point out their hypocrisy, they would get enraged. They would gnash their teeth. The religious leaders were also envious. It was their envy that nailed Jesus to the cross. So, the ancient religious leaders of biblical times are similar to today's modern-day narcissists. I'd say they were more extreme on the continuum than most narcissists because they were cruel, they were ruthless, and literally they were plotting to kill Jesus in the most torturous, humiliating way. Jesus also compared false prophets to wolves in sheep's clothing, which is an accurate image to depict what a covert narcissist is like. So in today's video, I'm going to share some colorful things Jesus had to say about the religious narcissists and how Jesus instructed the people to respond. The passage I'm going to go through is Matthew 23. So here's a bit of context about what was going on up until the point of Matthew 23. So Jesus was quickly becoming a famous figure, doing healings and many miracles, and people were praising him and calling him Hosanna, laying their cloaks and their branches on the streets as he passed by. And on top of that, Jesus was on a mission to confront the corruption of the religious institution of his day. In fact, he had just turned over the tables in the temple of God because of greed and corruption that was infiltrating God's house of worship. And after that event, the religious leaders were trying to test Jesus over and over, trying to trap him in his words with many controversial questions, or sometimes these convoluted hypothetical scenarios. But Jesus was brilliant and wise, and he rendered these people speechless each time so that no one dared to ask him questions anymore. So basically, you have Jesus coming out of these encounters with the corruption, the twistedness, and the duplicity of the religious leaders. And now, in Matthew 23, he's about to unload, in a spirit-led way, of course, his feelings about these people to his disciples and the crowds of people listening. So I'm going to highlight 4 main things Jesus says about the religious narcissist, and then 3 ways he instructs his hearers to respond. So here goes. Number 1, Jesus says, do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach but do not practice. So that is an interesting statement. A lot of times religious narcissists can say all the right things and have biblically sound messages and all the right Bible verses, but the problem is their agenda behind the words they say. They actually treat words as tools to accomplish a certain purpose. And James says in the Bible, let your yes be yes and your no be no. But to a narcissist, a yes is only a yes for that specific moment in time and is subject to change at any given time with no warning. And same with their no's. There is zero to little consistency and substance in the words that they use. So they may have teachings and sayings that will move the hearts of the people who listen, but they themselves ascribe to little or none of what they say. In other words, they just don't practice what they preach. And Jesus calls such people hypocrites. He compares them to whitewashed tombs. They look good and pure and pious on the outside, but on the inside, they are full of dead men's bones. So Jesus says listening to a religious narcissist has some merit, of course, if what they say lines up with the truth, but there is no merit in following their example. Number 2, the second thing Jesus says about religious narcissist leaders, they tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. So again, Jesus is describing some interesting narcissistic traits here. They have unreasonable, unattainable expectations of others. They have a high laundry list of religious requirements, expecting people to perform and be good enough for their approval, but these people are not willing to help others, and they don't live up to the high and strict standards that they impose on others. Jesus goes on to say later in the chapter, what sorrow awaits you teachers of religious law and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the more important aspects of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. Blind guides, you strain your water so you won't accidentally swallow a gnat, but you swallow a camel. That is a lot like a narcissist who may perform a bunch of religious activities and look very good on the outside, but neglect dealing with the sins of their heart, like pride, envy, hatred, deception, anger, to name a few things, which are heavyweight issues according to God. Paul the Apostle says that you can have faith to move mountains, you can prophesy to the moon and back, you can fathom all the mysteries of the world and give generously to churches and ministries and organizations, but if you don't have love in your heart, none of it counts. Number 3, the third thing Jesus says about religious narcissistic leaders is that they do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. In other words, narcissists spend more time and energy creating an image of being super spiritual than actually cultivating the spirituality within themselves. These people are very image conscious. Number 4, the fourth thing Jesus says about them, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi. And rabbi means in the Greek, my teacher or master. So these religious leaders, just like narcissists, have a high sense of self-importance and grandiosity. They always want to be considered VIPs and be around the VIPs. So after Jesus points out all of these narcissistic attitudes in the religious leaders, what does he say to the disciples and the crowds that he is speaking to? He highlights three main things. Number one, first, Jesus addresses any possibility for narcissism to be in the attitudes and hearts of the crowd. So he says to them, don't let people call you rabbi. In other words, don't get infected with the narcissistic pride, self-importance, and grandiosity of the religious leaders by pursuing lofty positions and titles for the sake of being honored or being admired. Don't pursue it. Don't look for it. Take a different approach from the religious narcissists who want to have this hierarchical structure so that they can be masters and lords over other people. Now, I am not condemning hierarchical structures. The Bible also says that God establishes authority, and so authority is good. To go against God-established authority is lawlessness. But what I'm talking about here is a hierarchy that is oppressive and disempowering of others, and that is something that God frowns upon. So consider the next thing he says. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. So here Jesus is emphasizing the equal value and level playing field of all God's children under him, with God being the ultimate teacher and father. So Jesus is warning his disciples and the crowds not to take on the attitude of superiority of the narcissist who needs a lofty position to lord over others, to get people to submit to them. Number two, the second thing that Jesus tells the crowds and disciples is, don't call these people your father. You have one Father in heaven. You have one instructor named Jesus Christ. So you have no obligation or requirement from God to call these types of Christians father or mother or spiritual father or spiritual mother, or to take instruction from them. When you have hypocritical spiritual leadership, Jesus would have you look to him and God the Father for spiritual guidance and teaching, and not to those leaders. And this is wise advice, because leaders who are out for their own gain, who are doing their acts of spirituality and engaging in relationships in order to attain their narcissistic supply, will surely exploit you. And so just as Jesus did not entrust himself to man because he knew what was in man, Jesus in this passage is advising you to entrust yourself to God instead, who is your true teacher and your true instructor and true father. Now, this is not to say that you should not submit to godly leadership or godly people. The Bible also says that we should give honor where honor is due, and we should submit to the authorities that God establishes over us. But what is important to do, and increasingly more so in these times, is to be looking at fruit in a person's life. And fruit should be more important to us than a person's giftedness or performance or intellectual intelligence. Finally, the third thing that Jesus said is, the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Again, Jesus addresses the issue by turning the kingdom of God on its head, basically elevating traits that fly in the face of narcissism. While a narcissist is arrogant, proud, and conceited, and sees themselves as superior, Jesus is telling his disciples to lower themselves and become servants. And he talks about walking in humility, because that is when God's exaltation in our lives comes in. I will add that nowhere in this message is Jesus saying to be a servant to these religious narcissists. He is talking to the disciples and the crowds and telling them to have a servant's hearts towards one another. When it comes to a narcissist, submitting to them only feeds their sense of entitlement. So narcissists actually need a different remedy and a different expression of love to be awakened to their narcissism and the sins of their heart, if they will allow themselves to be. You can watch my video on Can Your Love Awaken a Narcissist to understand more about the kind of love and relationship a narcissist needs. So Jesus expresses how a religious narcissist is always striving to be up in a high place, but their efforts are utterly useless, because at the end of the day, God is just going to humble them. So just imagine how much energy a narcissist expends to look good, to appear spiritual, to make all the right connections, and all that these behaviors attract are God's resistance and his humiliation. So if you are worried about the corruption you might be seeing or experiencing in some religious ministries or spaces or with people, don't worry. Those people who are proud and arrogant are doing a great job of setting in motion all kinds of spiritual forces to oppose them. You don't need to do anything, actually. They're doing it all by themselves. All you need to do is just practice the true godly virtues of Jesus Christ, which is to become meek and humble, to have a heart to serve others. And if you cultivate this heart disposition, you will set in motion all kinds of spiritual forces to raise you up, and you will not have to strive for anything. So I hope this video was helpful in giving you insight into what Jesus would say concerning religious narcissists and how to respond. Now, shifting gears, are you in a season of transition? If so, check out a free training I have put together. It is all about 3 key ways to navigate a transition. These are things that brought a massive breakthrough in my life when I was going through a difficult transition. I have included the link in the description box below. If you'd like to see more content from me and have not subscribed, click on the subscribe button. If you have suggestions of topics you would like me to cover, please feel free to drop your ideas in the comments section. And this brings me to the end of my video. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.